Hello and welcome to episode 83 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. In this episode I'm joined by 80s pop sensation Tracie, aka the fabulous Tracie Young. From answering an ad in Smash Hits to auditioning for Paul Weller's Respond record label, to beat Surrender with The Jam, to Top of the Pops, to Speak Like a Child with the Style Council, and solo top 40 hits, The House That Jack Built. Give it some emotion. Who can forget that absolute corker? We're going to chat about her solo career, touring and recording with Paul Weller, along with the truth behind that second album that remained unreleased for over 25 years. We'll chat about the Respond record label, we'll hear about the highs and lows of a pop career from Tracie and what she's been up to since, plus plenty of questions from you, the fans, for me to include as well. So let's get into it. My very, very special guest, Tracie Young.
You're welcome.
I love the fact you've had your hair done especially for the podcast, which is always nice to see.
Did. I had more than half of it cut off since the first time we met, which is a shame because this is not visual and the last time was, but hey ho.
Yeah, no, looking good. Although not as impressive as your hair looked in the 80s, I have to say.
Yeah, I did go through some hairstyles and colours in the 80s. You know what? It's a funny thing. So when I first met Paul, here you go. I don't think I've ever told this story before. When I first met Paul, I had just had all my hair cut. I had very, very long hair. I used to wear it Farrah style, as we all did in the 80s. Lots of tonguing and flicked out. But I just had it cut because my hair is naturally very dark. I had all these blonde highlights put in it. And then you keep doing that, keep having the highlight roots done. You end up blonde eventually, of course. Hence, I ended up with that look. The day that I dyed it back and had it cut into a bob, and I dyed it back to my natural, very dark brown, and I walked into Solid Bond with a new haircut and a completely different colour. And Nikki was in reception. And I just breezed through and went straight down to the studio, and Nikki was like, excuse me, you can't just go down there. Yeah. And I'm like, hello, it's me.
Love it.
And I think actually my hair right now looks very similar to it did that day, a little bit longer, but yeah, dark sort of bob. And she hadn't got a clue who I was because nobody had ever seen me with my natural coloured hair then.
That's so funny. When I first moved to London, I ended up having my hair chemically straightened, and it was a bit of a Paul Weller look. It was a bit to try hard, to say the least, and spent about 6 hours getting it chemically straightened and went to work the next day. And I was stood next to my boss for a meeting, and he had no idea who it was. And apparently he said to his PA afterwards, he's like, who's the new guy? He had no idea it was me.
We all went through some torture in the 80s, I think, with our hair, and did,
Absolutely.
I was young. It was a time to experiment.
Okay, let's kick off. And to do that, I think we should head right back to the beginning. So tell me about where your love of music first came from.
Well, I got given my first record player when I was 6. My mum gave me one of those. It wasn't a dance set, but that type, the little fold-up suitcase record player for my 6th birthday. And she gave me 2 K-Tel, maybe you're too young to have.
No, I remember, yeah.
Compilation. Yeah. So those compilations that were really big in the 70s and 80s, long before Now came along. She gave me 2 of those. And then that was it. I was always cadging old 45s off grandparents and what have you. I just loved music, probably more than my mum did. I don't remember my mum being particularly a big influence on me with the music. But hey, something about me said to her, record player for your 6th birthday. So yeah, that was quite a big thing. And so music was always big in my life. Going to college, we were like a lot of teenagers. I remember us on the bus. We always had a little tape recorder. We were always up on the top deck playing music, trying to influence other kids with what we were listening to. Same at school. Music was very important at school, and kids are really trying to influence each other or outdo each other with their coolness. Every time my bedroom was redecorated, it was always around what record player I'd got and where that was going to go and where the speakers were going to go. So I don't know. It just always was a big part of my life.
And did you used to sing along with the songs? Were you singing along to the record player? Was that something you enjoyed?
All the time. All the time. And you know what? This isn't cool. Well, for me, it's cool, but it wouldn't have been considered cool then. I'm saying cool in air quotes, by the way. I actually improved my range. My range was pretty good when I was younger, and I actually taught myself to do that by singing along to 2 Barbra Streisand albums that my mum had. One was called Songbird, and the other one was the soundtrack to A Star Is Born. I loved both those albums, and I used to sing along to them all the time. And when I first started singing, I couldn't reach all the notes, but I would just keep singing and singing until I could get every single note without a conscious thought in my head of, I want to be a singer. It wasn't like that. It was just, I enjoy singing and I want to be able to hit every note when I'm singing along.
Nice. Okay. And obviously this is the Paul Weller Fan Podcast. So when would it have been that you were first aware of the music of Mr. Weller? And obviously it would have been the Jam, but were you a fan of the Jam or were you just aware of their existence?
I wasn't a fan per se. There were some songs that I really liked of the Jams, but I hung out with a lot of people who were big, big fans. A lot of my friends were mods or were just into the Jam. So he was always in my orbit, as it were. And I didn't really have strong feelings about him one way or the other. I like this song, I like that song, didn't like this one. Didn't really have albums apart from All Mod Cons, which I didn't buy on release. I bought it later. I remember buying it on a day out in London, but it wasn't at the time it was released. And Sound Effects, which I did buy when it was released. They were the only 2 Jam albums I had. And I had Strange Town. I think that was the only single. But going underground, I remember being at school, everybody that brought a packed lunch, we had a room. All these years later, I remember it was B16. B16 was the room that all the people...
I know it well.
It's mad, isn't it? I couldn't tell you what I did yesterday morning. But
Yeah.
B16 was the room where we had lunch. So I remember being in there and somebody always had the radio on. And the chart was Tuesday lunchtime then. So Tuesday was a big day for us all hanging out in there. And there'd been all this buzz, not just amongst school kids, but on the news as well, about the Jam about to go straight in at number 1, which was so rare back then, so rare. And I can remember listening to the radio with all these other kids when it was announced that Tuesday lunchtime that it had, which we all knew, but it had done it, gone to straight in at number 1. And I liked the song, so I was happy, but there was nothing compared to the atmosphere around me. It was like New Year's Eve. Things being thrown in the air, there was cheering. Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, that must have blown their mind, what happened very soon after. That must have absolutely blown their mind. So let's dig into these stories, because I saw the other day, I found it finally, the Situations Vacant, the ad in Smash Hits magazine. Paul Weller's Respond label are still looking for a female singer to record. Paul would like to stress that you don't have to be a 60s maniac to qualify. All you need is a strong voice and good technique, send a cassette, and then various other bits and bobs with the address and stuff. Was that the ad that you saw in Smash Hits magazine?
That to me sounds like the second time he put it in, because he put it in twice. The first time I saw it, and I really, really wanted to do it, but I didn't because I was only 17, so I didn't. And then the second time, which was either 2 weeks or 4 weeks later, because Smash Hits was fortnightly. So I'm guessing it was probably about 4 weeks later. Yeah, I thought, well, if he hasn't found anybody, what have I got to lose? So that's when I sent the tape in.
That's funny, isn't it? The second ad being so open, just being like, either nobody's sent any cassettes or I've not found what I'm looking for. And obviously he's a huge name. So the fact that, Respond was this new record label that Paul was setting up. His version of Motown is how I've kind of read about it.
Was actually already set up by them. It was already going. Yeah, because the first ad, I think, mentioned the Questions and how they were on the label. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it was already set up because the Dolly Mixtures were on the label as well.
Yeah.
But the Questions were already signed. So I think he was looking for a female artist. He had a female group, he had a male group, or girl group and boy band, as we'd call them these days. But he had those and he wanted a solo artist. So, yeah. So
you see the ad in Smash Hits magazine, you grab the cassette deck and pluck up the courage to sing into it. Take me through that journey.
Yeah. I don't remember, if I'm honest, I don't remember if I did it the first time and just didn't send it and just kept the tape all that time, or if I just didn't bother and it wasn't until the second time that I actually recorded it. So my mum had recently moved. I'd just left Essex. I was feeling a bit like cut adrift because my mum got divorced and moved back to her hometown of Hereford. And I was 17, feeling really kind of like I didn't belong. I'd had to leave behind everything that I'd grown up with. And I just didn't feel like I had any direction whatsoever. And just before I left, in the few months before I left, I'd started to put out feelers about joining bands. I'd had a very brief flirtation with a synth band from Basildon, which didn't really pan out. Yeah, when this ad appeared, either the first or second time, my mum had one of those music centres, but you could actually record straight into the built-in mic. You didn't have to set up a mic or anything. So I thought, what can I sing? And one of the songs I've been singing along to a lot at the time and felt really good about singing was from a Phoebe Snow album called Rockaway. There were quite a few covers on that album, one of which was Shira Shira, the Betty Wright song. So, and I've been singing along to it such a lot. I just did that. And that was literally the only song. It was one song. And I just recorded it completely a cappella, no background, nothing, just in my mum's living room into the music centre. Thought, that'll do. Put it in my bag. And there it stayed. There it stayed for quite a while.
Eventually you pluck up the courage to put it in the postbox.
I did, because I'd come up from Hereford, or come across, down, whatever, from Hereford to a Q-Tips gig at the venue in Victoria. So I was just in this great mood. I was seeing one of my favourite bands. I was with an old school friend who I hadn't seen for a couple of months, and I just came out on a high and stuck it in the first postbox that I saw as we left the venue. Yeah, just on a buzz. It could have, it was already addressed, but it had been sat in my bag, certainly for days, but I can't remember if it had been there for weeks, as in the first advert. I genuinely don't remember if I recorded it after the first ad or the second.
Right. And it's a pretty quick roller coaster from there to Top of the Pops, really, if you think about it. We're talking like a very short period of time before you get the phone call from, was it Jill Price who rang you, Paul's girlfriend at the time?
Yes.
Yeah. And what, you have to go in for an audition, do you?
Yeah, it was all really fast. And at the time, people asked me, and they still ask me now, was it all crazy? You just don't process it like that at the time. You meet someone who's really famous, you get over that very quickly because you're working with that person. And so very quickly they become not a stranger, not a famous person, just somebody you're working with. And yeah, it all snowballed very fast. So there was the audition, went to London, did that, bashed out some tunes. Pete Wilson was there. He played some tunes at the piano. Me and Paul had a little sing-song. From there, it was, okay, here's a song, The House That Jack Built. Go away and learn it. I'll be in touch. I don't think there was ever a moment where he said, yes, you're the one. It was just a rolling conversation that never ended, I don't remember how the communication happened. Because in your head, when you tell stories like this these days, you automatically transpose modern media into it. So I'm like, yeah, he phoned me or I phoned him. And I'm like, no, we couldn't have done. Nobody had mobile phones in those days.
Yeah.
I don't remember how we kept in touch, but we did somehow. I remember him sending me a tape in the post. I remember calling him when I heard that the Jam had split because I wanted to know how that affected me. It didn't. He said, no, everything stays the same, but I am going to send you another song. So he sent me A Solid Bond in Your Heart, a cassette, and said, I want you to learn some harmonies, practice them, come up with some ideas for backing vocals, and then later contacted me to say, that is going to be our last single and I want you to sing on it because I think it would be really good. People will wonder who you are. They'll see you on Top of the Pops. They'll say, who is this girl? He said, so it will create a bit of a buzz. I set about learning bits and pieces, which I loved, only to then, about a week before, have the rug pulled out from under me when don't forget, all of this happened between September and November. So it's a really short space of time from meeting him to going to Air Studios to record Beat Surrender. So yeah, about a week before that, he sends me another tape, calls me. I don't remember. It's not going to be that song now. It's going to be this one, which I didn't love as much. It wasn't as instant. I do love it. I do love Beat Surrender, but it wasn't that instant as soon as I heard it. Yeah, I love this. And he said, you haven't got to do all the backing vocals. We've got some other girls doing some other parts, which was Aphrodisiac. He said, but I want you to do these parts. And then, yeah, the next thing I knew, I'm at Air Studios. It was a Sunday morning, typical November, December Sunday. We recorded the song. It was very weird. It was the first time that I met Bruce and Rick. And yeah, it was, it is strange, but talking about it now seems strange. And at the time, obviously, I would have been a little uncomfortable or a little bit nervous, but not in the way that people imagine, because you just do it. You just get on with it. It's like first day at a job. By the end of the week, you're not walking around questioning it all the time. You're just doing it. That's how it works.
Yeah. And that Jam performing on Top of the Pops, was that you with the Jam on Top of the Pops singing with them?
That was indeed me.
Yeah, I thought so, because you're in the back and it's a bit fuzzy because of obviously the quality of the TV. I was watching on YouTube. I was like, yeah, I think that is Tracie.
That is me.
That's mad. Like straight into Top of the Pops. yeah. And he's in the background for once, which wasn't always the case with the Jam.
Me and him at the back. I think Rick was at the front. He's on TV all the time. People are constantly sending me links on Facebook going, you were on TV tonight. I don't watch them all. But yeah, I think me and Paul were at the back. We did a little rehearsal where he said, I want us to do a little dance, and I went, I'm not much of a dancer. He was like, no, me neither. But I want us to do a little dance. He said, so, if we just kind of just be in sync with each other. And he said, you go for it. And he always that was his favourite thing. You do it and I'll follow. Yeah. Didn't take me long to suss that wasn't true. But yeah, he wanted to do that. And he was very interested in styling me at that time as well. So he wanted me to wear ski pants, which was something I already wore anyway. And then he'd got it in his head that there was a lot of ski wear in C&A at the time. Oh, everywhere's got ski jumpers. We go to C&A, they're really good. So we went to C&A, me and Paul, and bought this ski jumper, the one that I wore. But they had goggles. And he wanted me to wear the ski goggles as well. And I was like, are you taking the piss? I didn't know him very well, obviously, and I was only 17, but I was quite gobby. I had a lot more confidence. Seriously, are you taking the piss? He went, it'd be really funny. People would be talking about it. It'd be great. I'm like, but you want a buzz because we're going to do something else after, and you want people to know who I am or to ask questions. I said, do you really want them to be asking who's the nutty bird with ski goggles on? Is that really the buzz that you want to create? It'll be hilarious. I'm like, yeah, for you, not for me. You know, it won't be funny for me. So he wanted me to wear them around my neck. Do you know, to this day, I can't remember whether I did. I don't think I did. I don't think I did wear them, but he wanted the compromise to be I would wear them around my neck. Can you imagine? It's, you know, people are all emotional. The Jam have split up. Here they are, number one. And in the background, this big distraction is this lunatic young girl wearing ski goggles. And if I'd said yes to the ski goggles, knowing him as I do now, he would have gone, let's have some poles as well. And then it would have been actual skis. But I didn't wear the goggles. Then I went out. We were looking for some nice boots, not with Paul. That was with a friend of his, Lee. We kind of compromised. But I wasn't happy with that look. I have to tell you, I wasn't happy. Yeah, it's probably the same now. Obviously, I don't see him so often now. Very rarely we speak and see each other, but I can't imagine he's changed. He is what he is.
Yeah, a bit of a wind-up merchant by the sounds of things as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that, do you know what? That was one of the first things that I discovered about him that I was able to pass on to all my friends who were these massive fans. And like, he's actually a lot funnier and a lot more mischievous than you might think. Because I had been very much under the impression that he was a bit of a misery guts before that. Very serious and actually quite a negative down sort of person who was just angry about everything. He's not. He's really not. Yeah. Very funny.
Yeah, well, that humour comes through in the band, the Style Council. And we'll talk about how your worlds intertwined between that band and you immediately going on tour as well. I think your first gig was like January 83. Was it Bananarama and the Questions you were on? Can you remember?
That was a thing at the Drill Hall. So that probably was about January. Yeah, I don't remember the exact date, but it was certainly before the house that Jack built.
Now you would think most young singer-songwriters or young singers get coached within an inch of their life in terms of TV and radio and the media training and what to say, how to act, all that kind of thing. Did you get any of that from Paul at all? Did you get any from John? What type of advice did you get? Because you're straight in the limelight. You're straight in the top 10 of the charts. You're on things like The Tube, being interviewed by Jules Holland, which is fabulous. Top of the Pops, all those kind of things must be terrifying, I thought, for any youngster. What kind of advice do you get from the Weller family or the crew or the record label? Bugger all.
Nothing. So it just didn't happen. Whether it happened for other artists, I don't know, but it certainly didn't happen for me. It was partly naivety, partly just because I was always very open with people, would let people get very close to me, quite often put my foot in it and say things because I didn't realise they would go into print or that they would be used out of context. You know, the only time things got into print that I felt misrepresented me were a couple of occasions where I mistakenly thought that the journalist and I were friends. And I learned the hard way that they're doing a job. One of them didn't mean to be fair. It was an accident. And that was when I got that Smash Hits award. He didn't do it on purpose. I can't remember his name now. It was Peter something. But we had hung out socially. And I don't think he deliberately stitched me up. The other one did, which was a bit of a misfortune for me.
The Smash Hits award was the most fanciable female. Was that one?
Yeah. And so because I knew the guy and I didn't even know there was, Smash Hits awards were a thing. He just caught me off guard and I made a load of flippant comments because I thought he was winding me up. I thought it was a joke. But unfortunately, even after I realised it wasn't a joke, it was the things I'd said in the 10 minutes preceding that made it into print. But hey ho, it just made me sound like a very, very ungracious winner. To do myself justice, I've always been a kind person and a nice person. But as a 17, 18-year-old, you can often been naive about how things come across. So that media training would have been very, very useful.
And how does it feel going into like newsagents and seeing your face on the cover of Smash Hits? There was an NME cover where it's like the girls star Paul Weller would build.
Do you know, I really don't remember, because I used to buy all the music papers all the time, literally all of them, apart from Kerrang! I don't think
anybody buys Kerrang, do they?
I don't even know if Kerrang! Was a thing then, but I used to get Smash Hits every fortnight, and then weekly NME, Record Mirror and Sounds, Melody Maker as well. Yeah, I used to buy them all. This was back when Record Mirror was still a paper. I just used to love it. I used to love all the pages that just had bits on. And that, don't forget, is how you used to find out about bands being on tour, tickets going on sale. That's how it happened then.
Now we should talk about the first singles. So The House That Jack Built, and give it some emotion. I've got this here. Where are we? A reminder for you. There was these things on there. I mean, I love the singles just for a start, but there was these things on there as well where it would be Tracie raps, and you would expect this to be Tracie giving it the old Vanilla Ice or something. But this was you being interviewed by Paul Weller.
It was I don't remember how it came about, but obviously it was Paul's idea, obviously. And they're very silly. That of the minute and a half or whatever they last, I reckon there's about 15 seconds of good stuff in there that's actually funny. Because I didn't know him, especially the first one. I really didn't know him well enough to respond to his humour and what he wanted back. But yeah, they weren't edited. They were just as the banter happened, you know.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because usually you think like of a single being like a repeat listen. You know, you'll cane that 7-inch, that 12-inch, whatever. But the interview I always find strange on a single because it's not something you'll listen to over and over again, is it?
But it's not even a proper interview.
No. Yeah.
Paul's in some kind of character. He's got some vaguely northern accent. I don't know. Who is he supposed to be? I don't know. I think he just didn't want anyone to know it was him.
But at that point, he was very much in control of everything. And you mentioned you were pretty feisty at the time. I gather there were a few clashes, it's fair to say. Would that be right?
There was one big one, which everybody kind of knows about now, which was when I walked in and heard what he'd done to give it some emotion. And he's absolutely no secret amongst this crowd that I really hated it. I absolutely hated what he'd done to it. I had no idea when I turned up at the first recording session that he was already going to have spent so much time on the backing track. So when I turned up that morning, I thought starting from scratch and I was going to have total input. Not to be. I turned up and he'd already laid down most of the backing track with this awful drum machine track that I hated. I had chosen a bunch of demos by Chris Free and Lissy Barron, A Craze. This one song, it just really spoke to me and I loved it. The lyrics were weird and dark and sadistic almost, but the tune was so light and breezy and the jangly guitar was just lovely. I loved it. It wasn't something that I would ever have imagined myself doing. Don't forget, I was somebody who I saw myself as a real soul girl. And then to walk into the studio and find that it had been, for want of a better word, butchered. I absolutely hated it. I was really, really upset. Absolutely hated it. I cannot give enough emphasis to the loathing I had for what I heard when he played it to me that morning. That was a bit explosive. That was the day of the infamous looking in the toilet by mistake. Yeah, I wasn't happy. We did have other clashes about songs. Souls on Fire was a single for the most stupid of reasons. It was a ridiculous reason. We had the album recorded at that stage. I wanted to release Far From the Hurting Kind. For me, Far From the Hurting Kind is still the hit single I never had. I will stand by that to the day I die. In my gut, I knew it. I knew it was perfect after the first two singles. And Paul said, this is pretty much verbatim, I don't want you to get labelled as a little soul girl. I said, I'm really happy with that. Like, that would be fine. This is me. This is what I want to do. This song embodies what I want to do. So I've kind of done what you wanted me to do. No. But it's on the album and you wrote it. Why is it okay on the album, but not as, anyway, we just kind of went round in circles. And I was very unhappy. So then he wanted to release Nothing Happens Here But You. And then we just got into this silly thing of me just putting my foot down because he'd put his foot down at my choice. So I was obstinate. I didn't want Nothing Happens to be the single, but I was fighting back because I felt hard done by. So we ended up compromising on Souls on Fire, which, to be honest, was a stupid choice. Apart from anything else, it was about 6.5 minutes long, and it sounds great as a 6.5 minute piece, but it didn't sound so great as a 3.5 minute piece.
The interesting thing, when the debut album comes out, and I've got it here, there you go, there you are. None of the singles are on it. And I know this was a bit of a Paul, it wasn't just Paul actually, I think this comes back, somebody else mentioned on the podcast, kind of goes back to the Beatles in a way, doesn't it? And Mick Talbot talks about it with the Style Council. Council, like they were constantly wanting to add value. So they'd release these singles that weren't on albums and all that kind of stuff. But it does seem mad when you're kind of trying to launch an artist that the 2 songs that have been out aren't on that debut LP.
And Paul did speak to me about that because, again, we argued, not viciously about it, but, that wasn't an aggressive argument. It was just a conversation about why. And he said that exact thing. In the 60s, singles were separate. There was the album and then there were singles, and you could buy both because they were different. Everything was value for money. And I said, I get that. And I get why you can do it as you with the Style Council, but nobody knows me. Yeah, there's been this hit single, and then there was this hit single, that both of which were quite a way apart. By the time this album comes out, the first single was a year old. It's been a year. Unless we get another hit single before then, this isn't the 60s. Things are different, but he wasn't having it. There you go.
How much of that album do you feel is the sound of you and what you were looking for? Because I have to say, when it opens and you've got the track I Love You When You Sleep, which is Elvis Costello written, right? And you'll have to tell me about how that came about. But I think that's a beautiful track. I think that's lovely. And that, to me, sounds like what I feel like you're saying that you would like to have sounded like. And songs like Spring, Summer, Autumn is another one which really stands out on that LP. How much of that felt right to you and you were really happy with?
Most of it was not a direction I'd ever seen myself going in, as that soul fan singing in her bedroom, extending her range to Barbra Streisand. The Q-Tips was the band that I used to go and see the most. Dexys was another of my big faves. So you can kind of imagine the sound that I saw myself embracing. So most of that album was not a place I saw myself going. However, Spring, Summer, Autumn is one of my all-time favourite recordings of all the things I've ever done. It just fell perfectly for me. That the vocal just came out of me in a way that I really liked the sound of because I was feeling it. I really felt it as I sung it. So, I loved that. If I'm honest, a lot of them were just fillers. They were songs that I chose out of the limited selection of tracks that were made available to me to choose from. Again, towards the end of my career, I did start doing little workshops with people, but that was never really offered to me before. I know I didn't have the confidence to take ideas and say, I've got a bit of a song, I've got this bit and I've got that bit and some words and a melody there, but not here. I never had the confidence to go to Paul and say, who's going to help me finesse this? Who's going to help me work on it? That didn't happen for a year or two. So the songs that went on that first album, a lot of them were fillers. Some of them came out of the fact that I was shoved on tour very quickly as well. Now, I only had to do a half-hour set because it was part of a package tour, but we tried some songs out on that tour. There was no time. There wasn't the time, and there wasn't this huge pool of songs to choose from. And if you think about it, Paul's whole idea with Respond was to have like a Motown environment where you had a house band, you had house writers, you had the singers. The artists weren't expected to write their own songs or play their own instruments because there was a band and there were writers. The plan was good, but there wasn't enough to fill the pool. So I wasn't really a big fan of Can't Hold On Till It's Summer. Never really had a warmth for that song. Thank You was my choice because it was a song written by General Johnson that was on a Martha Reeves album that she'd issued in the 80s, which I found in a 50p bucket in some shop off the back of Oxford Street somewhere.
Dr. Love was another one.
Kind of a filler, really, because Dr. Love was the original B-side to The House That Jack Built, the 7-inch, which is good fun. And it was huge fun to do on tour. So it's really camp and kitschy and, it's no masterpiece, but it is a good one to do on tour and to do live. We used to have such a laugh. Me and Vaughan, when we used to do that together, it was just so much fun. It got camper and the woos got louder and louder with every tour. But it was fun. The audience liked it. And actually, it was quite a nice, fun thing to do. But you don't want a whole album of things that you think that might be fun to do live.
You were flung into the live scenario pretty quickly as well. Like you said earlier, you were overseas, you were part of the European tour with the Style Council. So when the Style Council formed, Paul takes them immediately to Europe and you were part of that lineup, and some gigs the Style Council would come on first and then you'd be after it. It was all kind of messing and playing with the format, I suppose, of live performance. But straight away, you're doing pretty big venues at times as well, aren't you?
I'd forgotten that. Yeah. He used to split his set in two, didn't he? And we'd come on in the middle. Yeah, I forgot. So he is very experimental, but that is a lot of pressure. And he used to talk to me about writing, but I didn't know really how to do it. And as I say, I never approached him about help me to finesse this, help me to give me somebody to work with, to help me turn my ideas into actual songs that I've written for myself. That's how I ended up because I was on the road so much from the beginning, ended up doing some not such great songs, really. We worked some stuff on the road over the next couple of years. I Can't Leave You Alone being one. It was a song that I'd always really liked. And we took this very laid back, jangly guitar song and turned it. And on stage, it was amazing. And the first time we ever tried to record it, it just didn't sound like it did live. It sounded like people jamming in their garage. So we thought it's not going to work. But then I went on tour. Oh, sorry, I've probably gone way off topic here. But when we went on tour in 1984, just as me, not with the Respond package, a guy came and spoke to me afterwards at the bar or somewhere. And he told me he was Bobby Bluebell's brother. I think he said his name was Lawrence, but he said he was Bobby Bluebell's brother. Don't want to say that too many times. And
was he the guy in the Bluebells?
Bobby Bluebell was, yeah.
So Young at Heart and all that, right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But this guy said he was his brother. I thought he said his name was Lawrence, but it's a long time ago, so I could be wrong. But he was Bobby Bluebell's brother anyway. No, it was in Glasgow, I think, this gig. So he had no reason to lie about that. But he was having a long conversation with me about the set. And then he said, that George McRae version you do, you have to release that as a single. He said, it is amazing. He said, that is without a doubt the highlight of what you have done tonight. And I explained that we tried to do it before. I said, trust me, I know. I love the song. And I know as a crowd pleaser, it's there. We couldn't make it work. And he said, you have to go back and try again. You have to come at it from a new approach. That is your song. That is your next hit single. So yeah, that's why we did it again. And Brian Robson was amazing. The things he did on that song, that second version, the studio version that was eventually released as a single. Yeah, the things he did on that was incredible.
So he was the producer and the guy who mixed the end records, is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And
not the footballer.
No, not that Brian Robson. Brian Robson was an engineer at Solid Bond, and he worked on all my stuff and then started to produce a few bits. And so Brian produced the whole of the second album, with the exception of the three songs. Paul Barry produced the two songs that he wrote, and John, I can't remember his surname, Mealing, but he did the whole string arrangement on the new version of Invitation. Apart from those 3 tracks, he did all of the production on the second album, and he was brilliant and he was really experimental. We used to stay up till really late. We'd work all hours. We'd come out of the studio at midnight and go and have an Indian. It was just so much fun working with him. And he was really into trying sampling and technology, things that were still really new. And that's what we did with I Can't Leave You Alone. There's a lot of sampling on that, of little brass parts. And of course, then when we did the B-side, he did a load of sampling, not only of live audio from the Animal Raid, the Animal Activist Raid that we had a video of, a videotape, and he sampled a load of sound off it, but also sampling Souls on Fire, which was the track that we used as the basis for Wickham 19 mix.
Yeah, this is the play on the Paul Hardcastle song, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny enough, I was listening to that earlier on before this. I was like, I've forgotten this one. Yeah. Now, we have to talk about the touring experience, because at such a young age, you're then going around the world, presumably. Where did you go off to? Because it wasn't just Europe, was it?
No. So the first tour I did was a promotional tour. So that was just doing TV shows and bits and pieces. So that was with Paul and Mick and me, I think. We did TV shows. Paul had us all these suits made, the pinstripe suits. They were double-breasted. Paul and Mick's were obviously trouser suits, double-breasted black pinstripe suits. Mine was a skirt. The only time I ever wore it outside of that tour was on Top of the Pops for the house that Jack built. I wore a denim jacket with the skirt from that suit. And off we went to Europe and did all this TV, including, have you seen that one with the hotel room where we're all singing on the bed? Yeah. That was part of that first tour.
Right. And Weller's, like Paul's mum's in that one as well, isn't she?
Yeah. She walks in with I think that was completely by accident as well. She walks in with the tray of tea, bless her. We had such a laugh, honestly. And then the singing tour started. So we got back from that. And then it was, okay, now I have a hit single. And then it was the Respond tour. And then we did the second single. Then there's another Respond tour. And yes, in between all of those were the European tours where I would support the Style Council, and the UK tour where I supported the Style Council. Not America, but I did Japan. Yeah, we did a festival there. Yeah. Lots of other artists, which was in Tokyo and Osaka. So we did a couple of gigs in each, I think. I loved it. Those times on the bus were really good fun as well. Really good fun. And I think that's probably where all my really good memories of Mick come in. Mick is a understated genius in terms of his humour. So whereas Paul was always more out there and mischievous and in your face with it, Mick's just, he comes across as taciturn, but he's not. Well, maybe he is, but it works for him. Yeah, he's great. He's just lovely. And seeing him the other way, it's the first time I've seen him properly in years. I think I ran into him at Radio 2 easily 15, 16 years ago, and that was very brief. And then he messaged me last year, but that's the first time I've spent any time with him in a long time. And yeah, he's great. He always was great.
Tell me about Amsterdam with you and Dee. What happened in Amsterdam? Can you remember?
Why are you asking about that?
Well, unless there's something, your face tells me maybe I've got a different story. But didn't you get given...
No, it's just, did I mention this to you? Did I mention it?
I read about it. I can't remember where. It's probably in Iain Munn's book.
Oh, okay.
Mystical's Dream. But yeah, tell me the story about you and Dee in Amsterdam.
So me and Dee were sharing a room. We didn't always share a room. Sometimes I shared a room with Helen, but on this occasion I was sharing a room with Dee. We didn't have a gig that day. I believe there was a press conference the next day, or it might have been that night, but I don't think it was that night. Anyway, in the morning, I can't remember why, John gave us 100 quid each, and that was in pounds, not guilders or gliders, as we used to call them, pre-Euro. Actually gave us £100 and said, "Here, girls, go out and get yourself something pretty." Right. And it was just, I'm not saying me and Dee were rampant feminists or anything ahead of our time, but we just thought it was hilarious that John had said this to us. You know, go out and buy yourself something pretty. Like, we're there on tour. We've kind of got everything we need, you know, to be pretty. So we went out and we found these 2 hideous plastic hair slides, one each. That was our something pretty. And then we had lunch. I think we had 2 bottles of wine at lunch. And then we came back to the hotel room and spent the rest of it on champagne on room service. We were absolutely trolleyed, but we had our something pretty to show John that we bought the next day. It seemed a lot more impish and minxy at the time. We were quite drunk, so it would, didn't it? So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And also, you're all really young. It's like kids on tours. A lot of people have talked about those Style Council tours and it being like a youth club. People like Kenny Wheeler having to kind of, you know, look after you and keep it all in order, you know. Yeah,
we were. I mean, I was just turned 18 the very first time that I went on one of those tours. So in all the time, I don't think I'd even reached my 20s throughout most of it. It was bizarre. But that's what being young's about. You know? Well, yeah. But the worst thing is, of course, Paul didn't drink in those days. Paul was in one of his teetotal phases. So I'd never known him to have a drink. Honestly, it was hilarious years later when there were some stories and things in the paper showing him absolutely bladdered, like out in the street, caught by the press, sort of thing. And I'm like, no way. If I had 2 glasses of wine, I got the kind of the judgmental looks, you know.
Now we should touch on the Elvis Costello link. I said, okay, we'll come back to that. Opening track on the album. This wasn't an introduction through Mr. Weller, was it?
No. I did the tube a couple of times and I don't remember whether it was the first or second time, but either way, he sat behind me on the plane on the way back and I'd never met him before, didn't meet him on the show. And he suddenly leaned through the seats and handed me something. And he went, "Here, have a drink on me." And he handed me a tea bag. It's probably an old and corny joke, but I heard it.
I like that.
No one had done it on me before then. Anyway, so I sort of looked at it and looked a bit puzzled and I was like, oh, right, okay. And he went, "Come back and have a chat when we've taken off." So I went and sat with him and he was talking to me about what I wanted to do, what kind of music, blah, blah, blah. And he said, "You know, if I had a song for you, would you be interested?" "Absolutely, definitely." He said, "I'm quite reticent," he said, "about giving people songs." He said, "Because I don't want them then to make a big deal out of it's an Elvis Costello song and use that." He said, "Just make it your own and do what you want to do with it," which I understood. So pre-mobile phone days, maybe it would have been better in this day and age if I'd been able to make direct contact with him. But that wasn't how it happened then. So he sent the song, blah, blah, blah. It came through Paul. We couldn't make it work at first. We were in the studio rehearsing it and I was really struggling to get a handle on how to do this song. I couldn't find the right rhythm, so we couldn't get the right arrangement. So I went to Paul and said, "You know, I'm struggling with it. Leave it with me. I'll phone Elvis. I'll speak to him," which he did. Again, very awkward not having direct contact with the person themselves. And the message came back, "Try it with a bossa nova rhythm," which is sort of what we did. That was the starting point for how it ended up. But later, when it was chosen to be a single, I think he was really, really pissed off that so much was made of it being an Elvis Costello track. And I remember him saying to me on the plane, he didn't like that. I performed it live on TV several times and it always sounded good. It's hard. It's really hard to sing, especially if you come off the back of something that's a lot more up tempo. It's very, very hard. But when you nail it and it's perfect, it sounds so good and it feels like such an accomplishment to have delivered it properly, you know?
Now, you mentioned the second album, so I'd love to dig into this because we did finally hear it after, 25 plus years. So I'd love to hear about the story of that, the making of that, and why it didn't get released at the time. And it seems to be linked, I'm guessing, with the Respond record label coming to an end as well. So talk me through the timeline of that.
So the distribution deal with A&M ended. So that's who had originally distributed The House That Jack Built and other singles around that time. That ended. And then Paul got the Polydor on board. I had already started recording songs for the second album because I believe I Can't Leave You Alone was a Respond release some way into the recording of the second album, or just before we sat down to do the sessions properly. That was when Paul decided to no longer continue. So there was a distribution deal with Polydor in place, and then Paul decided to not continue. Now, again, I'm surmising here. Right? Things were said at the time, which led me to believe that Polydor actually weren't that into it, but did it because Paul was one of their biggest tickets. And so they would kind of acquiesce to his demands, as it were. And I believe that one of his demands for staying with them was to take on Tracie, as it had been, or John negotiated that. I think it was, as I say, to acquiesce to Paul. I don't think they really wanted me, if I'm honest. It then became even harder, if that's possible, for me to release what I wanted to release. Hence, Call Me became a single. I didn't want that. It was a 5.5 minute recording. It was always meant to be an album track, and it did not work to chop it out. It's a track that builds and builds and builds. It's got real momentum and a proper crescendo. Yeah, it just didn't work to chop it to pieces and make it a single.
And how did it feel to do that work and have that? Because that album was in the can, wasn't it? And then didn't see the light of day until years later, which you made happen. But that must be crazy, isn't it?
What didn't help, and I'm not saying it was how big a factor it was, but it was a factor. I think it was just the excuse they were looking for to drop me, because I don't think they ever really wanted me. But what didn't help was the 19, the Wickham mix, the actual recording and the sleeve notes. So I was kind of kept out of the loop a little bit as to how much legal action was taken. But I gather that Paul Hardcastle himself objected to the parody, I suppose is the right word for it, of 19, and claimed some sort of copyright infringement. But worse than that, with sleeve notes on the back about what the subject matter of the song was. So again, my understanding is, and I don't know this for a fact, but I know there was some legal action because the sleeve notes were deemed to be libelous. They were written by a law student who had a connection to the incident, and they were proofread by him and checked, obviously not well enough. And I think the resulting settlements that had to be made to one or both parties, if such settlements existed, were just the reason that Polydor needed not to renew my contract and not to release the album. I don't think they ever really wanted me. It was all about keeping Paul sweet, really. They were quite active with I Can't Leave You Alone. They were pretty good with that, actually. But that was when I was not directly signed to them. That was when I was still on Respond and they were doing the distribution. They were pretty good, pretty proactive. But once I became directly signed, they just kind of took the lead. We'll go with the Paul Weller song. Oh, that hasn't worked out. Oh, well, let's call it a day then. Oh, and look, she's getting us into trouble as well. Bin her off.
Oh, man. How did it get to the point where that album saw the light of day then? That was you making that happen, was it, with Cherry Red?
Yeah, so I did the gig with Billy Franks in 2008 or 2009, I don't remember, and had no thought whatsoever of any recordings or releases coming off the back of that. Then Cherry Red got in touch and said, we would like to re-release your first album on CD. Would you be interested? So yeah, I said yeah. And they were just going to do a 5-year deal based on the one album. And then I said, while we're talking about it, there is another album, that never got released. Are you only interested in re-releases, or would that be something that would be interesting to you? And yeah, they went for it. They loved it. So then it took a lot of people. If I'd had more time, we could have done so much more with it. It took, and I want to give big credit to Alan Jacobs, a friend of mine who used to work at EMI Publishing and had always been a really, really good friend to me and really involved and proactive. He was one of the people who, a year or two on said, let me hook you up with people you can workshop your songs with. And, Alan was great. He really helped with digging out all the tapes for that second album and things that we might use as extras and bonus tracks. He was great. If we'd had more time and more money to finance the facilities, we could have dug out an awful lot more tapes. There's stuff still that's much better quality than even stuff that I did put on those cherry red releases, but they're all in a vault somewhere and we don't know how they're labelled. Finding things that were labelled the way I remember them was really hard. Things have been taken out and used. So I own the rights to all of that stuff. Paul sold it to me for £1, I might add, way back. I would say about 20 years ago. He sold them all to me for £1. He let me just type up an agreement and he signed it and sent it back. So I own it all and it cost me £1. However, he had also released things and used the tapes prior to that or in the overlapping period, say in Japan. And so things weren't where I thought they would be. Things weren't labelled as I thought they would be. So we were reliant upon kind of what was readily available and what could be easily identified on we're talking about 1/4-inch tapes from the labels that were on them, just pencil writing. We couldn't afford to take everything out. It all has to be baked and go through a whole process. We just didn't have the finance, the resources, the facilities to do that. But it's a shame because there's a lot of good stuff. There's loads of songs that I can remember demoing that would actually have made better extras than some of the stuff that we recorded, that we released rather, but I just couldn't find it. I recorded demos from 2 songs Nick Hayward gave me. There was a great song, can't remember who wrote it now, but Ruby Turner had done the demo originally called Overdose of Love, which I did a great demo of. The original version that we recorded of I Can't Leave You Alone, from the very first demo to, you know, what we tried to do as a single the first time that we wrote off because it sounded like somebody jamming in a garage, but as an extra would have sounded terrific. You know, it was so good, so much more like the George McRae version than that version that we released. So there's loads of good stuff in the vaults, but as I say, I lack the resources to access it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, you hear that as well with Paul's stuff as well. And I think even the Style Council, so you did on the Our Favourite Shop album, you did backing vocals on Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? But there were alternative versions of that with you on as well, weren't there? That are somewhere, hidden somewhere in the vault somewhere.
There is one that includes most of the vocals that I did, or certainly more than one of the singles, with a guy called Noel McCallagh did a version, and it was included on a not for sale CD that EMI released to showcase Paul's songwriting.
Okay.
And it's called something like The Songs of Paul Weller and then the dates. It's got my version of Spring, Summer, Autumn on it, which was incredibly flattering, but also an alternative version of The Boy Who Cried Wolf with this guy Noel McCallagh singing the lead vocals. And actually a lot more of the vocal parts I did on that are on there. And I love that. I love singing that song. It's great. And I really love the sound. I always like the sound of mine and Paul's voices together. I wish we'd got to do it a bit more, really.
And when that album didn't get released, that second album, did you step away from music at that point then? Because it was, you mentioned the gig in 2009, but there weren't many live performances from you after that point, were there?
No, I did one gig in 1986 at the Camden Palace, which quite a big one. We got the brass section in and all of that, did the whole shebang. And then there was a lady at Polydor who'd been in the press office there, who I'd met through Paul and done a lot of work with. And she worked with Respond as well when it was going through A&M, because she moved to A&M. Her name was Chrissy Cremore. And I'd known her such a long time. And I said, look, I've got all this work that I haven't released. I kind of need a manager. So she agreed to manage me. She was really lovely and she tried her best, but I think holding down a full-time job and trying to deal with me at the same time was too much. So she dropped out quite soon after. But I don't know if you've ever seen, it's on YouTube now, there's a video for me and Jimmy Stone.
No, I've not seen that, no.
The songwriter paid for it, a guy called Paul Fitzgerald. He actually paid for that video to be made. And we put together a little package to take around record companies with that video and a CD with a couple of the demo songs on, plus No Smoke Without Fire, which was a song that I was really, really big on. That was, for me, was one of the really strong tracks on that album. And then I think we only went to maybe 1 or 2 record companies. And then Chrissy said, I can't do it. And I think I just sort of lost faith a bit after that. My get up and go, got up and went, as they say. But then I went to see, okay, I've got to be really careful here. I'm telling you things that I've not spoken about before, really. I went to see a couple of people, one of whom, well, I suppose you'd call them both agents, really, just to get some advice. What can I do? Which way can I go? And both of whom sort of steered me down the presentation path, which weirdly is where I kind of went to later. But I had done a bit of TV presenting at that time. And they both said, well, why don't you go down this route? One of them then, let's say one of them was more proactive than the other and took me to some events and made some phone calls and had some meetings, and spoke to me about an idea with Michael Hull that he'd already put into production about a TV show that I would do. It was like a kind of a chat show, and would have bands on as well, and that would make me a sort of a serious presenter around music, but would allow me to also sing with these artists as well. They had this whole show planned out. I have to emphasize, I personally never had a conversation with Michael Hull, but this was the pitch that was put to me, making me nervous. I've never told this to anybody before, which is why I'm not giving names. But let's just say there was an incident that was very much in keeping with the Me Too movement. And at that point, that was when I walked away. I just felt like, yeah, all roads were closed off to me. That particular path, I had no recourse. I felt like I had no route back into the industry if I was to tell anybody. And that probably pathways were closed. So yes, I did. I kind of walked away. And then I started doing some demos with a couple of writers from Essex. When the second album was released, so there's 2 tracks on it that I did with these 2 guys from Essex, Phil Quay, and I forget the other guys' names, but it was released on a label called Quay Records, just self-independent thing. There's a track called Baby Come Back, which is a kind of an 80s dance thing, late 80s dance thing, and that's decent quality. And then there is another track, which is a demo, and it's really ropey quality because it was an enhanced version of a cassette, a really, really old cassette. And I co-wrote that song with him. And again, it's one of the favourite things I've ever written and ever recorded. I loved it. And I'd have loved that song to have been done by somebody else. I can think of lots of people who would have done amazing versions of that song. And that's what I was doing. I was just sort of putting feelers out and starting to feel confident enough again to sing with people when I met my husband. So I just went, no, do you know what? I sod it all. And I went off and got married and moved to Solihull and had a baby. And that was it. And I kind of forgot all about everything. I just put it all behind me until the late 90s. And then I moved back to Essex and I had no hankering to sing again, but I started to think about radio as a route in which to fulfill my love of music, my passion for music, without actually having to do it or getting into any of the mucky stuff myself.
Well, you got to live the dream as well. You got to live the one that I grew up listening to. So I was born in Basildon, listening to Essex Radio. You spent like 20 years in presenting in radio, is that right?
Yes, I did. All in Essex as well, but nearly all at different stations. So Essex FM was my first gig. I was the producer and the co-presenter of the best 80s show in the world ever. And from there, I went and did the Traffic and Travel. And from doing the Traffic and Travel, I got my own show, started out as a weekend show. And from there, I went on to have my own breakfast show. And it stayed that way until 2018. And I just walked away from radio and moved. It was during my time in radio. It wasn't connected, but during my time in radio that I did that gig with Billy. And yeah, it all kind of came full circle. And I feel pretty happy with the fact that I got to do a decent version of Give It Some Emotion, one of which is on tape, not just at the gig. Just at the gig at the Shepherd's Bush Empire, but was actually recorded in the Radio Essex studios and is on the second CD. I've had an opportunity to just settle a lot of accounts, if you like.
Well, you probably caught that radio bug, which gets to a lot of us, I have to say. It was much the same. I've got some questions from the fans, which I have to do before we wrap up as well, because I'm so aware that I've taken so much of your time. So this is from King Truman on Twitter. Is she allowed to mention Paul Young now? Weller never liked Tracie talking in the press about how much she liked him. Do you remember this?
That's not true. I saw that on Twitter the other day. That's actually not true. I'll tell you something that is, I think he didn't understand it. He didn't understand my fascination with, he didn't understand a lot of things. It wasn't Paul Young, don't forget. It was the Q-Tips, not Paul Young's solo.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah,
so this is different. Yeah. Paul Young's solo career didn't take off until well after the house that Jack built. So don't let me drift off the question here. But as a little aside, which I've mentioned before, I remember Paul's face looking at me like I was from another planet when I happened to mention that I liked the Eagles one day. You had to be careful what you mentioned around Paul, you know. If it wasn't cool, it could kind of make him look at you in a way that questioned your very being, you know. It wasn't, I didn't really care. It could wither you with a kind of a, you know, a look and a why, you know, why? Don't care. I still like a lot of the stuff the Eagles did. They were just albums that my mum had, so I was really familiar with the Eagles. And some of it's good. I like the Eagles. Yeah, I don't think there's meant to be a the. I think
no, there's no the. You're right. Yeah.
But anyway, coming back to the Paul Young thing, I honestly don't think he ever did. I don't think he ever told. I think he was puzzled. He didn't really get it. I think a lot of people saw the Q-tips more of, not a lot of people, some people saw them as more of a pastiche. But no, I think they were a great live soul act, and the energy was amazing. And Paul Young was hot. Why would I not be going on about him? Aside from John McEnroe, who to this day, for whom my love has not faded. You know, it's not the same with Paul Young now, but as time's gone on, all these years later, since I was 15 years old, I still love John McEnroe with every fibre of my being and would drop everything in a heartbeat for him. But Paul Young, it was a thing at the time. I was young. That's how we are. I will tell you this is absolutely true. I had a boyfriend at the time. When I first met Paul, I was 17. I had a boyfriend who I was with when I was in Essex. And then, of course, as I said, I'd moved to Hereford. So that was another reason why I was really excited whenever I went back to Essex or to London for a gig, as I did on that night. I sent the tape. And he was probably my first serious boyfriend. And Paul did actually say to me, probably not a good idea to talk about having a boyfriend in the press. Which when you think about it now, it's kind of scandalous, really. That is, you know, if somebody did that now, you'd really want to keep that quiet. You wouldn't want to be on record as having said that to your protege. Yeah. You know, don't talk about having a boyfriend. But
that was so common, even like the boy bands and the girl bands in the 90s. It was the same thing. It's like, don't mention that you're in a relationship with anyone, that kind of thing. Because, you need to be seen as attainable, I guess, for the fans. I don't know what it is. Weird.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. He said you just don't want people to have any reason to not take an interest in you, sort of thing. And talking about a boyfriend can make you seem unattainable. So try not to talk about your boyfriend. As it happens, we split up soon after, so it wasn't an issue. But wow, Miss Weller, so non-PC. Hey.
Beth Lawrence said, I saw her at the Marquee in London a few weeks later at the Ritz in New York City, circa 1985. Brilliant gigs. That ring a bell? We're not meeting Beth, but those gigs.
I remember playing the Marquee. That was an amazing night. Absolutely incredible. A big thing for me because it was where I'd seen my first ever gig. And I am talking the original Wardour Street Marquee. We finished with I Can't Leave You Alone, as we always did. And it was amazing. And I can remember coming off stage, taking my top off and wringing it out because we were so hot and we'd all had such a great night. It was amazing. That's not very ladylike, is it? But, it's very rock and roll, though, Yeah,
it is really rock and roll. It sounds lovely. There was colloquially mentioned actually you being like their first gig being used. Yeah, Stu Wilkinson, his first concert, Canterbury Art College, 1983. There were you, The Questions, Paul Weller and John Weller turned up as well. Vaughan was DJing that you mentioned. Big memories, obviously.
Yeah, Vaughan had a song that he used to play for me. So one of the days we'd been on tour quite early on in the Respond tours. We'd been out shopping and I'd bought a 12-inch of Mighty Hands of Love by Animal Nightlife. And Vaughan used to play that for me every night before I came on stage. So that was my song to stand in the wings and kind of warm up to and get in the mood. Mighty Hands of Love by Animal Nightlife. Going back to Beth's question about the Ritz in New York. Yeah, we only did 4 gigs in America, one of which was cancelled, and that was Washington. Yeah, I remember the Ritz. Very small. Nice little gig, though. It was good. Yeah,
and this was you and the Soul Squad, was it then?
Yeah, that was just us. It wasn't a Respond thing. It was just a Tracie tour. That was Paul's name. I didn't. Later, much later, they were called Tracie and the Sunshine Girls. That was me. but the Soul Squad was Paul.
Right, a couple of other things I need to ask you before you go. So actually, DJ Moon on a Stick said, did she enjoy her time running the Bowling Green, Bowlers, the pub in Hereford?
Do you know what? I really enjoyed that. So when I got married, that was something that my ex-husband, and I had always thought that we would do when we were older, run a pub. And I always fancied running a nice pub with lots of entertainment and live music. And then because my husband was a builder and we got married in 1990 around the time of the recession. So actually his work got hit quite hard. So we went into the pub trade quite a bit earlier than we expected. And we took on this pub called the Bowling Green in Hereford. The reason we were in Hereford was because we had a baby and we went off on 3 months training. And my mum, who lived in Hereford, looked after my daughter. And then while we were training in Hereford, this pub became available, Bowling Green. So we took it over, and it was only a tiny little pub. And it had previously been a biker pub. It's where all the bikers used to hang out. I'm very pleased to say we turned it around. In a couple of years, we made it really profitable through food, but also live music and entertainment. So while my husband's pride and joy was the beer and the cellar and everything, he was into his real ales and stuff. My passion was about the entertainment. And we did, in this tiny little pub, we had music. I used to do these really good pop quizzes. They were really a big event as well. Once a month, these pop quizzes where I painstakingly, again, just with a little home stereo, used to edit all these clips of music together. So there was always music for every question. And this was before computers and digital editing and Audition and that sort of thing, where you could just get the waveform and edit it lovely. This was just done, recording little bits, pause, play another bit, record, pause, But yeah, it was a passion of mine. And I did enjoy it. Thank you very much. I did enjoy it a lot.
Brilliant. Well, that's a great question. There's another one on Stu Wilkinson also mentioned, if given the choice of singing any one of Paul Weller's songs, what would you choose? And he said, by the way, I look like her ex-husband. I saw you obviously met Stu, right?
We met at that weekend, right, okay, where I met you. And this was really spooky. I'm just going to talk about that briefly before the song. So I came down. I was looking for a friend who was late arriving and had promised to meet me there. And I'd come down. There were loads of people there. And I was trying to get out to find my friend. And there were loads of people waiting for signings, things to be signed and have pictures and everything. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And every time I looked up, there were more people. I didn't get to catch up with my friend. At one point, I looked up, I think I may have I'd signed something, turned to do a picture. And I saw this guy and I did a double take. And I thought, oh my God, that's Steve, my ex-husband.
Why does he want an autograph?
I know. He was just sort of stood in the queue. And I did a double take. I had a stroke a couple of years ago. And I do have a little blind spot in both eyes. As a result, I always have to shift my vision to the left when I'm not sure of what I'm seeing. And I looked and I thought, oh my God, it is him. And I didn't want to stare. So I was doing these furtive little glances to the left. And I don't see my ex-husband very often. We're not on the best of terms, it has to be said. So but this did look kind of like how I imagined he would look since I'd last seen him maybe 5-6 years ago. And every time I looked up to do a photo with somebody else, this guy's getting closer. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what's he doing here? What's he going to say? Anyway, it wasn't him. It was Stu. Well, no, but when he finally approached me and spoke to me, I was like, oh my God, you look so much like my ex-husband. It's really freaky. And then I remember talking to him a lot that day. He came up a couple of times and said, have you got over it? I know you still look. And then he would turn away. I go, stay at that angle. You don't look so much like him from that angle. It's really weird. Yeah. What was the question anyway?
The question, which if you could pick one of Weller's songs, what would you say?
Oh man, I don't know. There are so many good ones. Oh, I should have thought about this because I did see him write this on Twitter. And oh man, there's so many. Do you know what? I'm going to say, let me think about it. And when you post that you're ready that the podcast is ready, I'll add an answer. How's
All right.
that?
That's a good one.
I'll have to go away and think about it. I wouldn't like to just say something for the sake of it. There are so many.
I should ask you about John Weller, actually. That was one thing I meant to ask you about, because John was played like a managerial role at times and was presumably pretty supportive all the way through and helps and stuff. What's your memories of the Weller family? It was lovely seeing you the other week at the Style Council thing and you and Nikki kind of bumping into each other and saying hello after all those years and stuff. But the Weller family means a lot, obviously, to the whole crew.
Always. John was my manager. Yeah, just a lovely, lovely, warm person. Do you know, the funny thing is, Nikki said, is it all right to swear on this?
Yeah, go on.
I know I've used some milder swear words, but this could get a bit Larry here. So Nikki said to me the other week when we were all together, it's the first time I've seen Nikki in a while. She said to me, you sound a lot posher than I remember. She said, is that because of radio? And I said, partly. I said, it wasn't a conscious effort. I said, it's been a number of things. I said, partly living in different geographical areas around the country, kind of refining how I speak. But honestly, if I'm truthful, a lot of it comes from not just going back in this. I said, and that's from not being around your brother and your father 24/7. Because it just does. I soak up other people's accents really quickly. I do. I just always have done. I absorb other people's accents very quickly and start to mimic them without realizing. And I realized that I became, when I hear back recordings of me talking or I watch old TV things and I hear me talking, I'm like, how is that me? And then I remember that I was hanging around with these guys from Woking, Kenny Wheeler and Dave Little and all these people 24/7. Every other word was fuck. pronounced fag. When I was on the breakfast show at Essex FM, I was known as the posh one. There was Martin, proper Essex bloke. There was Sue, a girl from Leicester, and there was me. And I was the posh one. I mean, I'm not posh. I was talking like I am now, not posh particularly. But yeah, since I stopped hanging around with the Wellers, I've become a little more refined. I'm not absorbing that accent all the time. But yeah, I love John. John was brilliant. I went to his funeral. I'd seen him a couple of years before at the Albert Hall. I'd been to something. Him and the whole family, Anne and Paul were all like, where's your daughter? But they were so desperate to meet my kids, and I hadn't brought them. And John almost immediately ripped open his shirt to show me his operation scar. I don't want this to be taken as a negative in any way. Obviously, family came first, but that extended family was always still very important to them and to those that were part of it as well.
Yeah. And presumably you got paid out of the briefcase of cash that you carried around everywhere you went, right?
Not as often as I should have done, perhaps. But the PDs were always good, yes. I love PD Day on those European tours and stuff.
You talked about musical snobbery. Wasn't there an element at one point where you were going to be entered in for the first step of Eurovision? So it's Song for Europe, I think, wasn't it? But John Weller was up for it. And Paul Weller was like, whoa, no way. Was that right?
Okay, I should preface this by saying that I'm a massive Eurovision fan and I always have been. However, even I knew that that'd be a really duff move. Even as a big Eurovision fan, I knew that doing it would be career suicide at that time. But yeah, there was a guy, Eamon somebody or other. I can't remember his surname, but he used to use Solibond. He was a jingle writer and he wrote a song for Eurovision. I can't remember how the song, I couldn't tell you how the song went now, but there was a demo with Kate Robbins singing it. He'd approached John and said, would Tracie be interested in recording this and submitting it to the Song for Europe? And John, I can hear him to this day, think about it, babe. Millions of people all around the world. Be fucking amazing. Fucking amazing. And I was like, look, I love Eurovision. I said, I don't think it would be a good idea, honestly. I said, but why don't you run it past Paul and then tell me what Paul said? Needless to say, it went nowhere. But I can still hear him to this day. Millions of people all around the fucking world. It'd be fucking amazing. You sell fucking millions of records, babe.
Talking of millions of records, actually, the first Star Council single was Speak Like a Child. You're their honorary councillor with you and Zeke Manyika. Zeke's been on the podcast as well. This is a massive single, sold hundreds of thousands of copies. And you got a disc from Polydor, didn't you? At one point, there's a kind of congratulations thing.
Yeah. I got a silver disc, yeah.
Yeah, but tell me about the trip to the Malvern Hills with the Weller family and the filming of the video for that, because you were part of the whole crew then as well, weren't you?
Yeah. So the Malverns, funnily enough, not very far from Hereford, where I was living with my mum at the time. So it didn't take me long to get there. And we stayed in a lovely hotel called the Cottage in the Wood. It was just lovely. I mean, it was freezing cold. The filming was not fun. It was my first ever experience of making a music video. It was so cold. It just wasn't fun. But there was fun within it, obviously. I was still getting to know Paul and his sense of humour around that time. Nikki was there. There were a whole bunch of other people. There was a girl called Louise. Can't remember who else now. Dennis was there, Dennis Monday. So yeah, we had some fun in the hotel after filming. It was a laugh. It was good fun. I don't have the silver disc anymore. I auctioned it. I did a Land's End to John O'Groats bike ride, 2007, I think it was. And that was for Little Havens Children's Hospice in Essex, which is my favourite charity. Me and my friend at the time, just on our own efforts, no publicity or anything. We raised 7,500 for doing it. Deserved a lot more. With a bit of publicity, would have got more, because it was the worst experience of my entire life. I do that Speak Like, I would have given birth every day for 14 days, or done that Speak Like a Child video outside every day for 14 days, rather than that bike ride. But we did it. One of the ways I was trying to bump up the donations, I auctioned. Hang on, the dog's whining. I'm just going to let her out. Come on, you. Come on. And the gentleman that bought it, really nice fella, who was a big Paul Weller fan, and whose wife had recently died, only a young guy. He bought it. So it was perfect. It couldn't have gone to a nicer person. And I took it round to his house when we got back off the bike ride. My friend Sally, I did the bike ride with. She had a massive party at her house, and I took the silver disc round to the guy's house that had got the winning bid and met him and his children and spent the afternoon with them. And then he came to the party, the end of bike ride party as well that night. So yeah, it was all perfect.
There are two final questions, which are always the same final questions at the end of this podcast. Number one is you're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council or solo. What are you going to go with?
My Ever-Changing Moods. No question. No other song. My Ever-Changing Moods.
Yeah.
Full band single version. Yeah. And when I used to do the AC show, I used to force myself to play either Jam or Style Council songs, but it was only because I was counting the weeks until I could play My Ever-Changing Moods again. Always My Ever-Changing Moods. There's nothing more uplifting, is there?
Oh, it's a great tune. Great tune, isn't it? And when they would do those songs on tour, where would you go and watch the rest of the band? Did you? Out front?
Always out front, yeah. Always used to watch them. Whenever I was on tour, I never missed a set. Every single night I was out front watching. Loved it.
My final question. So the purpose of this podcast is not least to talk to amazing people like yourself, but it's for me to get the interview with Paul Weller that I never managed during my radio career. If it happens, what should I ask him? Is there a question you think I should put it in?
Oh, wow. I don't want to make you jealous, but I did get an interview with him in my radio career.
Fuck it out.
It was the week before that Shepherd's Bush gig that I did, because he was playing Shepherd's Bush Empire and I did an interview with him there. So I went along with the little handheld kit and I interviewed him. So it was face to face. Yeah. What did I ask him? We talked a lot about sampling and, how back in the Jam days, he'd been accused of ripping off certain things and he talked about it as live sampling. He said, there wasn't any sampling in those days. He said, but I like to think of it as live sampling. It's not a rip-off. It's just incorporating another artist's work as a way of, almost as flattering and including it as inspiration rather than it being a rip-off. For example, the whole Star Taxman thing. So yeah, we talked about that. We talked, oh God, I can't remember. It's such a long time ago. Do you know what? I made a little promo. I've probably still got it somewhere with some little excerpts of it. If I find it, I'll email it.
Yeah, do. We'll put it into the podcast. That'd be cool.
Yeah, he met my son at the Somerset House exhibition a few years ago. And I can't remember if did he ever meet my daughter? I can't remember. I've introduced From the Jam on stage as well as part of my radio career. Yeah, all these things, it's weird. There's a kind of the way everything comes around and kind of interconnects somehow. But yeah, what would you ask Paul Weller? I don't know. What have you always most wanted to know?
Well, lots of things, and I'm writing a list, and I keep playing this whole thing over in my head every night when I have a little dream, and it's either gone really well or terrible, depending on the levels of anxiety at the time, I imagine.
Oh, really?
But yeah, because sometimes it's an absolute car crash, and he's a moody old bugger and doesn't want to answer any questions. This is not in real life. This is in my dream. Other time it goes brilliantly. It's lasting for hours, and we're at Black Barn, and it's going fabulously well. So who knows? It sounds like, from your point of view, it sounds like he's misrepresented in the press, where everybody said it was terrible to interview a moody old bugger. Actually, a lot of fun at times as well, right? I
imagine he probably was at times quite moody and quite, certainly he, I can remember. All right. Oh, this is going to sound terrible now. Right. I don't care. I'm just going to go for it. So I do get very frustrated on some days, because I can be a moody bugger as well, when certain things to do with Paul Weller monopolise my entire social media feeds. Those are the things that are being fed into, and I'm like, oh, really? And sometimes it's really good stuff and I'm interested in it, but half the time it's like, oh God, on a day when he releases a new record, you'd think the cure for cancer had been found. Honestly, it's like, really? This is a good thing though. This leads into a very positive thing. I know. But this leads into a very positive thing. So do you remember him co-writing a song with Ollie Murs?
Yes.
I've actually interviewed Ollie Murs a couple of times. And one of the times was when that album came out and I spoke to him about this. But just before the album came out, there was a press release or an article that made it very well known, blah, blah, blah. You should have seen my social media feeds that day, Facebook in particular. It was like the world had ended. Honest to God, these grown men all lamenting that Paul had lowered himself. The world had ended because, not just was Ollie Murs not worthy, but he'd come via the X Factor. Honestly, it was just appalling. But the immense snobbery that still exists. I really took exception, wrote quite a scathing post that morning, about people getting over themselves. And actually, come on, is it not a good thing that Paul is really open? Because I've always been quite played along with it in the day when it was Duran Duran and stuff, and it was a laugh. And blah, blah. And I wasn't particularly a Duran Duran fan. But as the years have gone on and Paul's mellowed and changed, and from the man who said, I don't want to be the aging old rock star playing it out till it's embarrassing. And there he is. It's not embarrassing. He's still doing it and it's not embarrassing, you know? My point that I was trying to make that day when I got very angry with all these posters on Facebook was, do you not think this is a really, really positive thing? That Paul's open to new ideas. He's listening to things. He's embracing new things. And he is sharing his talent with other people. You know, why would you not be willing to embrace that and be happy about it?
Hey, look, this has been so lovely, Tracie. I've loved every second of this. I really, really appreciate you spending the last couple of hours with me chatting about all this stuff.
Oh, has it been that long? Wow.
Oh, and there's still stuff I haven't asked you about, but look, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, mate.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Well, that was a real blast. My thanks once again to the brilliant Tracie Young for joining me on the podcast. An absolute pleasure to spend time in her company. And yes, I have now emailed Ollie Murs to join me on the podcast too. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do give us a follow on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'd love it if you could give us a 5-star review as well. It really does help us to find new listeners to the show. You can also hit the share button when you finish listening to put it on your social media channels and help to spread the word. Get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod, or you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Paul Weller Fan Podcast. And if you fancy it, buy me a virtual coffee on my website where you'll find loads more information about my conversation with Tracie and her career to date. Just go to paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.